In the following tutorial, we will be covering all the units in Module 3 of the book, Philosophy and Logic. This GST is from National Open University of Nigeria. My name is Dana Sukwo, your instructor. Are you writing any of the GSTs soon, or you want to improve your knowledge on philosophy and logic? If so, let us know on the comment section so that we can help you out. If you will need a summary of the book, let us know at the comment section. If you are a NOUN student or from any other universities, this will be very useful for you. Please do well to share it with others as well as on your study groups. Why not do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share for others too to benefit. Module 3, titled Logic. Unit 1, Definition and Scope of Logic. 1.0, Introduction. The meaning and nature of logic, as well as its relevance, is crucial to the discussion of logic. Although it will require more effort from you, it remains nevertheless the best channel that will help you to learn how to think critically. Thus, in this study, you will learn the meaning, nature, and functions of logic, the various processes of logic and their classifications, common errors in reasoning that you would have to avoid, and effective techniques for evaluating arguments. 2.0, Intended learning outcomes. By the end of this unit, you will be able to logic in philosophical thoughts. 3.0, Main content. 3.1, Definition of logic. Let us begin by considering the origin of the word logic. Etymologically, the word logic is derived from the Greek word logike, meaning possessed of reason, intellectual, dialectical, argumentative. Fadahunsi Adegboyega, 2010, 94. Another account on the historical origin of logic says that it is from the word logos. Logos is an expression of reason or order in words or things, principle, mathematical ratio, thought, or simply word. Ogbinaka, 2000, 187. In the history of philosophy, Parmenides was the first ancient Greek philosopher that developed some logical principles, and these are the principle of identity and the principle of non-contradiction. His logical construct of what is and what is not gives rise to the Aristotelian conception of truth-functional logic, ibid. Although he did not label his inferential analysis a logic, but we can say that his metaphysical postulations provided the basis upon which Aristotelian and modern logic developed. Having discussed a little on the origin of logic, it is important to point out that, unlike philosophy itself, logicians seem to agree on what logic means or what it is about, although logic has been variously defined by different scholars. But then, all this definition points towards the same subject matter of logic. For instance, Aristotle sees logic as the scientific study of fundamental principles of human thoughts and the laws that underline valid thought processes and discourse. Uduigwomen and Ozumba, 1995, 155. Copy defines logic as the study of the methods and principles used in distinguishing good, correct, from bad/incorrect reasoning, 1972. On the other hand, Nancy sees logic as the science that appraises reasoning as correct or incorrect, 1990, 3.4. Kahane, on his part, defines logic as an attempt to distinguish between correct, valid from incorrect, invalid arguments, 1968, 2. For Moses Oke, logic primarily is the study of methods and principles used to assess the strength of the evidential link between the premises, supporting reasons, and conclusion, claims or arguments. Oke, 1999, 165, 166. Basically, you can notice that in the above definitions, the words which stand out clearly are reasoning and argumentation. Therefore, we can say that the study of logic is the study of correct and incorrect reasoning and arguments, or that logic is the science of reasoning. 3.2. Logical processes. Simple apprehension, judgment, reasoning, and argument constitute what we call logical processes. Simple apprehension. Simple apprehension is the act by which the mind forms the concept of something without affirming or denying anything about it. For instance, if I say, "Look at that ship," and stop there, this is a simple apprehension because I have not said anything about the ship. I have neither affirmed nor denied anything about the ship. Some philosophers and logicians have denied the possibility of a simple apprehension. According to them, there is nothing like simple apprehension, judgment in logic. Judgment is known as the act by which the mind affirms or denies something of something else. For instance, if I proceed to say, "Look, that ship is big," then I have made a judgment by affirming the bigness of the ship. Reasoning and argument. Reasoning and argument constitute the third and last stage of any logical process. It is also known as the act by which the mind passes from one, two, or more judgments to a further judgment distinct from the preceding ones but implicitly contained in them. Besides simple apprehension and judgment, logic is strictly concerned with reasoning and argument. 3.3. The relevance of logic. Logic is of immense relevance, so it is very important to study it. It is the only discipline that strictly lays down the rules which the mind must follow to arrive at truth and thereby minimize, if not totally eradicate, error. In other words, logic works as a guide through the critical thinking process. As a discipline, it will also equip you with the skills needed for effective and forceful presentation of your views. It forces people to think about the outcome of propositions before they ask questions. You need to know that until a beneficial question is discovered, it is impossible to start the critical thinking process. Critical thinking involves asking many questions. The study of logic helps one to reason well by illuminating the principle of correct reasoning, explaining them, justifying them, and exhibiting their effective use. Copy and Cohen, 2000. Sir. It helps us to avoid claims for which we do not have enough reasons. It helps us to identify arguments where we might otherwise just see a set of unconnected or loosely related statement. OKE. 1998, 17 Bello, 2007-8. Describes the importance of logic when he asserts that a training in is an important one for society like ours, which is aspiring to democratic life, because in a democratic society, persuasion, rather than coercion or force, is the method of winning others to one's point of view. And in the business of persuading others, arguments are important. But you must know that to logic is sometimes perceived by its critics as a subject that has no practical use. This is not true. The abstractness of logic does not make it irrelevant at all. Indeed, it is not contradictory to say that logic is to life what oxygen is to life. We all need logic in one way or the other, in one form or another. We all need logic to communicate and interact in the society. Even to be illogical presupposes a logical action or decision. 3.4. Logic and other disciplines. Logic is an important area of philosophy. It is the tool with which philosophers perform their task of philosophizing. There is no way you can determine correct or incorrect reasoning without constructing arguments. And logic, being that branch of philosophy that draws the boundary between correct or incorrect reasoning, is very essential to philosophers. Therefore, it is not even an exaggeration to claim that logic is to philosophy what mathematics is to the sciences. Logic is even at the background of mathematics. Apart from philosophy, logic is important to other disciplines as well. Any good sociologist, historian, lawyer, politician, physician, and so on requires the services of logic like philosophy. So long as there is reason for arguments, classification, and ordering of things, logic is always needed. As earlier stated, it is only logic that can bring light, the general laws and canons to which reason must conform. Otokpor passionately terms logic as the queen of all disciplines. 1985, 85, 98. To him, it is obvious that no scientist, historian, lawyer, engineer, etc., can afford to present his/her work in a disorderly manner and expect to be taken seriously because to be logical means to be orderly. 2005. 3.5. Classification of logic. Traditionally, logic is divided into two main branches, namely formal and informal logic. However, the study of logic has grown beyond these two to include prepositional logic, deductive logic, inductive logic, mathematical logic, Boolean logic, fuzzy logic, modal logic, deonic logic, and epistemic logic. Formal logic. Formal logic is the study of inference with purely formal content where that content is made explicit. Formal logic is often used as a synonym for symbolic logic. It is usually described as the logic of symbols and implication. Informal logic. This is the study of natural language arguments. The study of fallacies is an important branch of informal logic. The dialogues of Plato, 1976, are a good example of informal logic, mathematical logic. This refers to two important areas of research, and they are the application of the techniques of formal logic to mathematics and mathematical reasoning. And the other one is in the other direction, the application of mathematical techniques to the representation and analysis of formal logic. It is an extension of symbolic logic into other areas, to the study of model theory, proof theory, set theory, and recursion theory. Boolean logic. This type of logic deals with the basic operations of truth values. Deductive logic. It is concerned with inferential reasoning that follows necessarily from given premises. An inference is deductively valid if and only if the premise follows from the conclusion, or if there is no reason for us to accept the premises as true and reject the conclusion. In other words, the conclusion is derived from the premises, or that the premises provide adequate support for the conclusion to hold. Inductive logic. This is the opposite of deductive logic. It is a logical process where a reliable generalization from observations is derived. Inductive logical evaluation requires us to define a reliable generalization of some set of observations. To provide such definition, it may take the form of mathematical models of probability. The process is such that the conclusion in any inductive reasoning is not supported in absolute term by the series of observations made. Prepositional logic. This form of logic is concerned with testing the truth-value validity of propositions through logical rules and principles. These include truth table analysis, truth-value tree analysis, formal proof of validity, and deductions, fuzzy logic. This is related to fuzzy set theory in mathematics. It simply says that truth values are not limited to truth or falsity. In this type of logic, what we have are true, false, rather true, not very true, not very false, more or less false, more or less true. Alozi, 2003, 17. Modal logic. Modal logic deals with the phenomenon that subparts of a sentence may have their semantics modified by special verbs or modal particles. For example, we go to the games, and perhaps we will go the games. More abstractly, we might say the modality affects the circumstances in which we take an assertion to be satisfied. According to Delibalogun in Fadahunsi and Adegboyega, 2010, 102, the logical modalities of modality includes deontic and epistemic logic. Epistemic logic. This is the logic of knowledge and belief. It focuses on propositional knowledge and provides insight into the properties of individual knowers, which has provided a means to model complicated scenarios involving groups of knowers and has improved our understanding of the dynamics of inquiry. You need to know that this form of logic has many applications in computer science and economics. Deontic logic. This type of logic directly involves topics of considerable practical significance, such as morality, law, social and business organizations, their norms as well as their normative constitution, and security system. 4.0. Conclusion. There are different types of logic. These logics help in critical thinking and analysis. Unit 2. Logics Vocabulary 1 1.0. Introduction. This study unit introduces you to some basic concepts logicians use. The unit will focus particularly on statement, proposition, premise, conclusion, and inference. 2.0. Intended learning outcome. By the end of this unit, you will be able to demonstrate the usage of logic vocabulary in expressing human behavior. 3.0. Main content. 3.1. Statement and proposition. There is no difference between a statement and a proposition in logic. The two terms are synonymous and thereupon interchangeable. However, logicians differentiate between statement and sentence. To them, even though the two terms are interwoven, they are not actually the same. For instance, in everyday English, a sentence is a set of words expressing a statement, a question, or a command. Thus, whenever a sentence expresses a statement without question or command, it can also be called logical statement. It should also be clear to you that in ordinary English, every logical statement is a sentence. But as stated earlier, not every sentence is a logical statement. It is only when a sentence can either be denied or asserted that is qualified as logical statement or proposition. For example, the sentence "Nigeria is rich" can be asserted as follows: yes, Nigeria is rich. It can also be denied by stating as follows: no, Nigeria is not rich. Thus, the sentence "Nigeria is rich" because it can be asserted and can also be denied is a logical statement or proposition. Any sentence expressing questions, commands, etc. does not qualify as logical statement or proposition. 3.2. Premise. Premise is also one of the basic concepts in logic. It is known as evidence or reason. Basically, a premise refers to that proposition or statement within an argument, which provides support for or grounds for asserting the conclusion of that argument. Menea Eze, 2003, 18. In a valid argument, the premises imply the conclusion. Premise and conclusion are relative terms. Conclusion does not necessarily mean the last sentence, the premise in an argument. A can be the conclusion in argument B and vice versa. For example, all men are mortal. Abiola is a man. Therefore, Abiola is mortal. In this example, the first two statements or prepositions are the premises while the last stone is the conclusion. Premise indicators. These are words and expression that indicate the premises within an argument. The following are some of the premise indicators: since, for, as, because, inasmuch as, for the following reason, s, given that, in addition, as shown by, beside, etc. When a statement follows any of the listed words, that statement is a premise. For example, since the Vice-Chancellor is in school, there will be light today. In any argument, the statement or proposition that comes after the word because is usually a premise. For instance, 1. There will be light today because the Vice-Chancellor is in school. 2. Adamu will pass the test since he is ahead of his colleague in the exercise. Besides, he is very brilliant. Whenever any of the above listed words is used, it simply means that the sentence that follow is the premise of the argument. For example, there will be light today for the Vice-Chancellor is in school. You must know that the list of premise locators cannot be exhausted. Those listed here are just few for you to know how to identify premise or premises in any argument. 3.3. Conclusion. In logic, conclusion is that proposition, in an argument, that is arrived at on the strength or basis of the information provided by the premises. Simply put, conclusion means to come or brings to an end. You should always remember that in any valid argument, the conclusion follows from the premises. For instance, 1. All philosophy students are wise. Aina is a philosophy student, therefore Aina is wise. 2. Abuja is in Nigeria. Nigeria is in Africa. Therefore, Abuja is in Africa. Here, the third preposition in each of the two examples, Aina is wise, and Abuja is in Africa, are conclusions in each of the argument respectively. They are arrived at based on the information provided by the first two prepositions, which are the premises in the respective arguments. Conclusion indicators. There are some expressions and words that function to indicate the conclusion within a passage. These are generally called conclusion indicators. For example, hence, consequently, therefore, it follows that, accordingly, in sum, for these reasons, we may conclude, we may infer, thus, so, etc. Whenever any of these words begins a statement or proposition, it is obvious that such proposition is a conclusion. 3.4 Inference. In logic, an inference is the process by which one proposition is arrived at and affirmed, based on one or more other propositions accepted as the starting point of the process. Kalpi and Coker, 2003, 6. It is mainly a mental activity of reaching a conclusion from a number of premises. For example, all footballers are strong. Ronaldo is a footballer. Therefore, Ronaldo is strong. Here you can see that the conclusion, Ronaldo is strong, is inferred from the first and second premises of the argument. That is, it is derived from the first and second premises of the argument. 4.0. Conclusion, statement and proposition. Premise, conclusion, and inference are some of the basic concepts logicians use. However, there is a difference between statement, proposition, and sentence. Unit 3. Logic's Vocabulary 2. 1.0. Introduction. This study unit is the continuation of the preceding one, Unit 2. It intends to introduce you to some basic concepts logicians use, but it focuses particularly on the definition, validity, and invalidity of an argument, the subject or predicate term in major, minor, and middle terms. 2.0 Intended learning outcomes. By the end of this unit, you will be able to differentiate between valid and invalid arguments, demonstrate logical skills arguments. 3.0 Main content. 3.1 Argument. An argument is a group of propositions that can be structured into two parts, that is, premise S, which is also known as reason, and conclusion, which can also be known as claim. The premises, which are some of the statements in an argument, is said to provide reasons, for which the conclusion is affirmed. The conclusion, which is part of the statements in an argument, is affirmed based on the other statements, which are called premises. At least two propositions or statements form an argument, otherwise it is not argument. But not all the statements are arguments. Some non-argumentative uses of statements, such as in reports, illustration, explanatory statements, conditional statement, etc., are sometimes confused with arguments. As earlier stated, at least two statements or propositions form an argument. In the case of two propositions, only one must be the premise while the other must be the conclusion. For instance, as soon as Ronaldo scores the second goal, the match ended. Here the conclusion is the match ended, while the premise is Ronaldo scores the second goal. The expression as soon as stands as premise indicator. When more than two propositions or statements form an argument, one must be a conclusion while the others must be premises. Example: all women are caring. Ada is a mother, therefore Ada is caring. You should always remember that no matter how many premises form an argument can never have more than one conclusion. 3.2 Valid and invalid arguments. An argument is said to be valid when the conclusion of that argument is derived from or follows from the premises. In other words, in a valid argument, it is necessary that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. Thus, in any valid argument, there is an absolute connection between the premises and the conclusion. In any valid argument, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false when the premises are true. For example, all Americans are proud. Peter is an American. Therefore, Peter is proud. What matters most here is the link between the premises and the conclusion, rather than on the truth or falsity of the statements comprising the arguments. Example: all birds have beaks. Some cats are birds, so some cats have beaks. Here you can see that although the second premise is false, the argument is still valid, because when the premises are assumed to be true, the conclusion must be true also. In logic proper, an argument can still be valid when all the premises are false. For example, all men are monkeys. All monkeys are politicians, so all men are politicians. However, it is not also advisable to hastily conclude that an argument is valid simply because its premises are all true. Example: some Nigerians are bad. Ukwa is a Nigerian, therefore Ukwa is bad. An argument can have true premises and true conclusion but may not necessarily be valid, because sometimes the premises may not support the conclusion in the right way. Are the premises actually true? Is the argument valid? These are two distinct and fundamental questions in logic. In logic proper, validity only preserves truth but cannot preserve falsehood. In all, you must know that a valid argument is concerned with the structure of the argument and not the content. An invalid argument is the opposite of valid one. But invalid argument has a peculiar characteristic. For instance, it is not necessary that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. In conclusion, any valid argument with all premises true is a sound argument. Any valid argument with at least one false premise is an unsound argument. All invalid arguments are unsound. 3.3 Subject or predicate term. Remember that we can talk either of the subject term of a proposition or the subject term of a syllogism or of an argument. But always remember that in logic proper, you must talk of the subject term of a proposition. Syllogism is more than a preposition. Syllogism is an argument that contains and must contain three propositions, two of which are called the premises and one the conclusion. A typical case of a syllogism is, all black women are beautiful. Casey Ngaman is a black woman. Therefore, Casey Ngaman is beautiful. In this syllogism, Casey Ngaman is beautiful is known as conclusion, and it necessarily follows from the first and second prepositions, which serve as premises of the syllogism. You can see that a whole syllogism can neither be asserted nor denied. But the sentence, Casey Ngaman is beautiful, which stands here as a preposition, can be asserted or denied. As the subject of the proposition, it is called the subject term. So Casey Ngaman is beautiful is the subject term of the above proposition. As it is with the subject term, so it is with the predicate term. The logician does not talk of the predicate term of an argument or syllogism. In logic, we talk of the predicate term of a preposition. For instance, in the preposition, Casey Ngaman is beautiful. The predicate of the preposition is beautiful. In conclusion, you should always remember that in logic proper, subject and predicate term are associated with individual propositions only. It does not matter whether that individual proposition is a premise or a conclusion. 3.4. Major, minor, and middle terms. Major term. Major, minor, and middle terms are all parts of a syllogism. But unlike predicate or subject term as seen earlier, a logician can never talk of major, minor, or middle term of a reposition. For instance, in an argument or in a syllogism, the predicate term of the conclusion becomes automatically the major term of the syllogism. For example, all Cameroonians are footballers. Etu is a Cameroonian. Therefore, Etu is a footballer. Footballer is the predicate term of the conclusion in the above example, but it automatically becomes the major term of the syllogism. So, footballer is the major term of the syllogism. You should always remember also that in logic, the premise containing the major of the syllogism is referred to as the major premise of that syllogism. Thus, in the above example, the premise, all Cameroonians are footballers, which contains the major term of the syllogism, footballer, becomes the major premise of the syllogism, because it contains the major term of that syllogism, minor term. As it is with the major term, so it is with the minor term. That is, the logician does not talk of the minor term of a proposition, but rather of the minor term of a syllogism. Always remember that in any syllogism, the subject or the subject term of the conclusion becomes automatically the minor term of that syllogism. For instance, all Cameroonians are footballers. ETO is a Cameroonian. Therefore, ETO is a footballer. In the above example, ETO is the subject term of the conclusion, and it automatically becomes the minor term of that syllogism. So, ETO is the minor term of the above syllogism. In logic, the premise that contains the minor term of the syllogism is called the minor premise of that syllogism. Thus, in the above example, the premise ETO is a Cameroonian, which contains the minor term of the syllogism, ETO, is called the minor premise because it contains the minor term of that syllogism. Middle term. As it is with the major and minor terms, so it is with the middle term. That is, the logician does not talk of the middle term of a proposition, but rather of the middle term of a syllogism. Always remember that in any syllogism, the term that occurs in both premises, but does not occur in conclusion, is called the middle term of that syllogism. For instance, all Cameroonians are footballers. ETO is a Cameroonian. Therefore, ETO is a footballer. You can see that in the above syllogism, Cameroonians is the middle term because the term Cameroonian occurs in both the major and minor premises but does not occur in the conclusion. 4.0. Conclusion. Logicians argue with subject or predicate term with major emphasis on predicate, subject, major, minor, and middle terms. Unit 4. Valid, invalid, deductive, and inductive arguments. 1.0. Introduction. This study unit introduces you to the analysis of inductive and deductive arguments. It will also teach you how a deductive argument is said to be valid or invalid, how an inductive argument is said to be weak or strong. This study unit will also teach you how to define and differentiate between sound and unsound argument. 2.0. Intended learning outcomes. By the end of this unit, you will be able to differentiate between a valid and invalid deductive argument, differentiate between weak and strong inductive arguments, differentiate between sound and unsound arguments, evaluate arguments in different contexts. 3.0. Main content 3.1. Inductive argument. An inductive argument is that kind of argument that its premise only support, but do not guarantee its conclusion. Inductive argument does not claim that their premises, even if true, support their conclusions with certainty. Furthermore, in any inductive mode of reasoning, the conclusion logically implies an item of information not necessarily implied by the premises, and that which can be confirmed or refuted only on the basis of evidence drawn from sense experience. Adali 2265. You also need to know that inductive argument is structured in such way that from one set of propositions, premises, it moves to another, conclusion. Also proceeds from the experienced, particular, to the inexperienced, general, from the known to the unknown. For instance, Mr. Roger Miller is a Cameroonian and a football player. Mr. Itu Fils is a Cameroonian and a football player. Mr. Rigobert Song is a Cameroonian and a football player. Therefore, all Cameroonians are football players. You can see that in the above example, the conclusion that all Cameroonians are football players, general proposition, is arrived at by sampling some members of the class of persons who are Cameroonians. But for some logicians, Minima and Inoka, 1997, there are also some cases in which the propositions of an inductive argument which are used as premises and conclusions may all be either general propositions or particular prepositions. This is evident in the following arguments. A. All birds grow from infancy to adulthood. All trees grow from infancy to maturity. All men grow from infancy to adulthood. Therefore, all living things grow infancy to adulthood. Minima and Inoka, 1997, 72. B. Idei. Amin was a dictator and was ruthless. Samuel Doe was a dictator and was ruthless. Kabila is a dictator, therefore Kabila is ruthless. Other facts that you must know about inductive arguments are: A. All inductive arguments are invalid. This is because the premises do not support the conclusion. B. The support offered by the premises of an inductive arguments to their conclusion is either high, strong, or low, weak, or none at all. For example, inductive arguments with high degree of support for conclusion. Almost all footballers are rich. J.J. Okocha is a footballer. It follows that J.J. Okocha is rich. Inductive arguments with premises offering low support for conclusion. Dangote worked hard and became rich. Otedola worked hard and became rich. Saraki worked and became rich. Therefore, all who worked hard will become rich. Inductive argument that do not support their conclusion. Iron, a metal conduct electricity. Copper, a metal conduct electricity. Aluminium, a metal conduct electricity. Therefore, all metals expands when heated. 3.2. Deductive argument. Logicians define deductive argument as that kind of argument in which the premises do not only support, but also guarantee the conclusion. In other words, the conclusion is directly inferred from the premises. It also means that the conclusion does not contain any new information aside those that we already have in the premises. Like what we have for inductive arguments, we also have different type of deductive arguments depending on the form the arguments take. We have those that move from general propositions as premises to a proposition as the conclusion. Example: I. All noun students have matriculation number. Adegboyega is a noun student. Therefore, Adegboyega has matriculation number. 2. All lawyers are liars. Yakubu is a lawyer. Therefore, Yakubu is a liar. We also have those that move from general propositions to a general proposition as the conclusion. Example: I. All lecturers are saints. All saints will go to heaven. Therefore, all lectures will go to heaven. 3.3. Valid and invalid deductive argument. A. Deductive argument is said to be valid if and only if 2. The premises imply the conclusion, or 2. The premises entail the conclusion, or 3. The conclusion follows from the premises, or D. The premises necessitate the conclusion, or E. The conclusion can be inferred from the premises. It should be clear to you then that a valid deductive argument is an argument in which if you accept the premises to be true, you cannot deny or reject the conclusion. If you do so, you will be running into contradiction. You should also know that in logic proper, the words true or false are used to qualify statements or propositions, while valid or invalid are used to qualify arguments. In other words, we talk of true or false statements or propositions and valid or invalid arguments. On the other hand, an invalid deductive argument is one that the premises do not support the conclusion. In other words, the conclusion cannot be inferred from the premises, or that the premises do not necessitate the conclusion. Invariably, you can accept the premises of the deductive argument to be true and reject the conclusion without running into any problem. 3.4. Weak and strong inductive arguments. As noted earlier, valid or invalid are words used to qualify deductive arguments. And while all inductive argument is said to be invalid, weak or strong are used to qualify inductive arguments. As stated earlier, an inductive argument is based on probability. That is why logicians rather use the words weak and strong. In an inductive argument, the words strong and weak are used to indicate the level and strength of evidence or data used as premises, and the degree of certainty contained in the conclusion. Any inductive argument is based on probability. Therefore, its weakness or strength depends on the degree of evidence contained in the conclusion. 3.5. Sound and unsound argument. First, the words sound and unsound have nothing to do with an invalid and inductive argument. They are only used to qualify a valid deductive argument. In point of facts, all inductive arguments are unsound. Also bear in mind that before an argument becomes sound or unsound, it must be first of all valid. Thus, only a valid argument is said to be sound. A valid deductive argument is said to be sound if the premises of that argument as well as the conclusion are all true prepositions. On the other hand, a valid argument is said to be unsound if the premises of that argument are either all false or contain a mixture of true and false prepositions, notwithstanding the truth value of its conclusion. Minima and Inoka, 1997-74. Why is it possible that a deductive argument with false premises can be described as valid? Minima and Inoka give us a simplified answer. The point is that the validity or invalidity of an argument does not depend upon the truth or falsity of its premises. Since an argument, deductive, is said to have a pattern or structure or form, an argument is thereby valid if it conforms or tallies with that structure or form or pattern. 1997-74. In a deductive reasoning, the pattern or structure is what we mean by words such as imply, necessitate, followed by entail, etc. Minimal and Inoka further insist that these words point to the fact that it is impossible for the premises of an argument to be all true while the conclusion is false. Once that happens, then that argument is invalid. 1997-75. However, in their own understanding, those words did not say that the premises could be a mixture of true and false propositions or false prepositions throughout, while the argument still remained valid. 1997-75. Therefore, as stated earlier, the words sound and unsound only show the truth value of the premises contained in any argument. For example, A. All noun students are dullard. All dullards will make heaven. Therefore, all noun students will make heaven. B. All Nigerians are Africans. All Africans are whites. Therefore, all Nigerians are whites. You can see that in example A, both the two premises plus the conclusion are false propositions, yet the argument is valid because the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. Again, in example B, the first premises has a true proposition. The second has a false proposition, while the conclusion is also expressed in a false proposition. But here again the argument is valid because despite the falsity of the second premise and the falsity of the conclusion is validly derived from the combination of the false and true premises. So, in both examples, A and B, the arguments are valid but unsound. Unsound in the sense that the valid arguments have false premises and false conclusion, and in the second example it has one true premises and one false premise with a false conclusion. Where a valid argument has all its premises and conclusion as true propositions, then that valid argument is also a sound argument. However, you should always bear in mind that the fact that an argument has all its premises true does not necessarily mean that it must be valid. It is possible to an argument to remain invalid even if all its premises are true. For example, All boys are dressed in shirts. Some girls are dressed in shirts. Therefore, some girls are boys. Thus, any argument in which all the premises are true but has the conclusion as false preposition must be an invalid argument. 4.0. Conclusion. In philosophy, there are valid and invalid, weak and strong, sound and unsound arguments. Unit 5. Language and its functions. 1.0. Introduction. This study unit will introduces you to the definition and function of language. It will also teach you some models of linguistic analysis. 2.0. Intended learning outcomes. By the end of this unit, you will be able to analyze the functions of language, evaluate some models of linguistic analysis. 2.0. Main content. 3.0. Logic and language. Generally, you need to understand that the definition of logic as the science of laws of thought imply a mutual relationship between logic and language. This position is informed by the fact that processes of thought rely on logic to thrive, and language, on the other hand, is better understood when logical processes are applied to remove ambiguity, vagueness, and enhance clarity of thought on one hand, and the use of language on the other hand. The dependency of logic and language on each other is reciprocal, as thought is believed to be prior to language, but its thought process is made possible through embodying itself in language. This has made language to be vital to the development of logic. In other words, the mastery of language enhances logical discussions, as evident in the philosophies of the sophists, Plato, Aristotle, etc. It is important for you to note that logic is concerned with different forms of expression in language, but only insofar as they embody differences of type in the process of thinking. This position is further stressed by Uduma o Uduma, that since logic considers language essentially as an instrument of thinking, its aim is to handle the instrument so as to make it a help, and not a hindrance to correct thinking. Uduma, 2015. Aside from what we have said above about logic and its connection with language, it is equally important for you to know that as a primary tool of reason, language enhances the description and organization of human, numerous experiences and make them to access the experience of other people. The human capability for language does not only distinguish them from other animals, it also gives them logical ability. Therefore, it is through the possession of language by human beings that their thought and conduct are made possible. Also, their possession of language enables them to organize their experiences systematically and produce valid inferences because with language they are well equipped with logical ability. Perhaps one should make you to understand that language is a social product. Its most obvious function, therefore, goes beyond the provision of a framework for thought, but also to serve as means of communicating, and gives thought meaning. However, this position should not be taken to mean that without language thoughts cannot be meaningful. Rather, language has simply been presented as a necessity in society for the proper conveyance of human thought. In short, the relevance of language underpins its facilitation of intelligent cooperation in all human endeavor and the enhancement of civilization in human society. 3.1. Functions of language. As an important aspect of human culture, language has unlimited functions. This view is corroborated by Wittgenstein, a philosopher of language, in his work Tractatus, see Uduma, 2015. Some of the uses of language he gave includes giving orders and obeying them, describing the appearance of an object or giving its measurement, constructing an object from a description, and many others. From Wittgenstein's point of view, the functions of language have been classified into three headings, that is, informative, expressive, and evocative. We shall discuss each of these functions one after the other. 3.2. Informative function. Here, the sole purpose of language is to communicate information. Language states fact, that is, it gives information about fact. When language is used to describe the state of affair about a thing, event, or situation, either it affirms or denies the affair. Language is said to be performing the informative function. Accordingly, science could be a good example of the informative function of language because it deals with what is factual. Thus, the following example: politics is a game. Nigeria is a country states nothing else but facts as information has been given about politics and Nigeria. You should understand that information could be in form of a proposition or an argument. The information above can either be true or false, in which case we shall be talking about true and false proposition. It could also be a misinformation, and when it is considered in the realm of argument, we shall be talking about correct and incorrect argument. However, irrespective of the status of the information, that is whether true, correct, or otherwise, what is paramount is that it gives an information, and the informative function of language is concerned with the truth value of the proposition. Therefore, the informative function of language is important to logic. 3.3. Expressive function. Here the sole purpose of language is to report feelings or attitudes of a person, writer, and speaker, or to evoke feelings in the reader or listener. Thus, the expressive function of language is not about factual report of a state of affair, but with expression of some sort of emotion. Language therefore performs the expressive function whenever it is used to arouse feelings or emotions which could be approval or disapproval. Uduma, 2015. For instance, the common reference to black African man as niggers by the Westerners always arouse an emotion of disapproval, unlike when they are referred to as black man, which often elicits some emotion of approval. The expressive function of language is commonly used in political and religious discourses, warfare, science, etc. And best example of the expressive use of language is found in poetry. Consider the lines of this song from a soloist. Amazing grace, how sweet it sound, that save a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. The above is not an information but an expression of a feeling of an unmerited favor. From the above, it can be pointed out to you that the expressive function of language reveals the internal state of mind of a person, feelings and attitude and emotions. It is the kind of language function that is sometimes referred to as emotional language function. It is either it evokes certain feelings or it expresses feelings, and it can both evoke and express feelings. 3.4. Directive function. This function of language is also known as evocative function. It is to cause or prevent an overt action. The utterance in a directive function of language operate as to evoke action from the hearer. The sense in which the word evoke has been used here is broader than in the expressive function of language. Here the word evoke means to provoke or cause an overt action, to produce an action. This use is not the same as we have in the expressive function where the word evoke means to excite emotions or feelings, that is to cause, to express a feeling, an emotion, or an attitude. The sole purpose of language under directive function is to produce action. Thus, when a father tells his child, "Go and clean the floor," the intention is not to communicate any information, nor is it to express or evoke any emotion or feeling. It is intended to produce action, and that is for the child to clean the floor. Another example is when a policeman orders a person, "Go and park there." We need to note here that directive function of language can be understood from three angles of a command: request and interrogation. The first two examples can be treated as commands. However, it can be changed to a request when a subtle means is introduced. For instance, when the word please is added, it becomes a request. For example, "Please go and park there," direct. The third sense, which interrogative, is usually in form of questions. For example, "Where were you?" This is a directive requesting an answer. You need to know that directive function of language does not any form of investigation on its truth value. This is because a command like "get out" can neither be true nor false. But then, a directive function of language may be definite, confused, either obeyed or disregarded in its command sense. It may be untimely, unauthorized, obliged, or unexpected. Furthermore, in both the request and command sense, it may be specific, reasonable, genuine, improper, and sham, unspecific and proper. 3.5. Mixed functions of language. This function of language is arrived at because it is observed that discourse can serve more than one function. In fact, most ordinary discourse are mixed, and aside this, effective communication demand and are made possible by combinations of different functions of language. When we give information to a group of trainees on the meaning of a concept, such that the information is describing certain phenomena or procedure prescribing or explaining the application of certain rules or terms, the information may also express and evoke sentiments or feelings. Such information is therefore serving the expressive function, and may also seek to cause certain appropriate actions from the group. When we also consider sermons that are preached, generally, sermons are directive and are meant to shape or turn the hearers to a particular way of life as contained in it, sermon, and possibly to avoid an unacceptable lifestyle. It is also may evoke feelings of awesomeness or admiration in the hearers, thus serving the expressive function, and may also include some information about historical events or other variable phenomena. An example of such sermon was Stephen's address before the Sanhedrin, Acts of the Apostles chapter 7. It is therefore possible for language to serve multiple functions, but this not to say that the specific roles of language in certain discourses are valueless or less important. While in a discourse like biology, it is informative. In literary works, it is expressive, but in logic, it is directive. Language also serves as directive in law, that is, to direct conduct. 3.6. Performative utterances. This use of language is generally associated with a mixed function of language and sometimes with the informative function of language. As the name suggests, performative utterances refer to language which performs the action it reports. It is a different form of function of language. The term was first introduced by J.L. Austin in 1955. It includes such statements like, "I promise to visit you tomorrow," "I shall contest the next election," etc. These utterances do not describe or report anything, hence they cannot be true or false. Each of them only constitutes doing something. Visit you tomorrow, contest the next election. These sorts of utterances only involve doing, they cannot be true or false. But Austin maintained that they can be infelicitous, that is, abused. According to Uduma, 2015, the abuse of these utterances, however, depends largely on the motive, circumstances, or conditions surrounding the utterances. For instance, the promise to visit may be made from insincerity, or I may not be qualifying to context any election. The main characteristics of performative utterances that attract philosophical interest are as follows. 1. It offers counter-instance to the verification's claim that only meaningful sentences are those which express true or false statements. 2. It belongs to the category of non-descriptive sentences. They are neither true nor false, but only felicitous or infelicitous. 3. It can do justice to the communicative and intentional aspects of language. The main thrust of performative function of language is that stating is performing, saying is doing. When uttered in appropriate circumstances, they perform the act it appears to report or describe. They are tied in special ways to the circumstances in which they are uttered. And this is what doing justice to the communicative and intentional aspect of language means. 4.0. Conclusion. From the study of the functions of language in this unit, the various functions of language seem to correlate with the different forms of language. Thus, the declarative sentences appear to be informative, the imperatives are directive, interrogatives are directive, and the exclamations are expressive. It may therefore be somehow difficult to identify form with function in language.